Welcome to this video. In this video, I want to talk about something or tackle something which I saw in a lot of comments and also in some of my courses that it can be hard to grasp, to understand. And that is the usage of the this keyword in JavaScript and why it can behave strangely in some cases. And it's also that when you call a function or a method, sometimes you omit the parentheses after the function name. And I want to talk about that too and explain when you call a function with parentheses and when you use it without these. So two important things which I see that they can lead to a lot of confusion. Hopefully this video can clarify these things. Now for this video, we need a tiny demo project to get started, and you can find it attached to this video, so to say. Below the video, you'll find a link to a GitHub repository with this very simple dummy project. There we got a HTML file with a HTML5 skeleton. In the body, I got a button saying add name. I got an unordered list with no content, but with that ID of names. And I'm importing my app.js script, which is this script, of course. In there, we got an error, which we'll fix, of course, in this video. And besides that, we got this code. Now, here I'm using JavaScript classes. In case you're not used to using classes in JavaScript, you probably know constructor functions. Constructor functions are normal functions which you can call to create new object and initialize them with some properties and methods. So I'm talking about object-oriented JavaScript development. And we need objects to understand and use the this keyword. That is why I opt for the next-gen syntax using that ES6 feature of classes. Now, you can also take my ES6 course and also my accelerated JavaScript course to learn more about constructor functions, and in the ES6 course, you'll learn about classes. Here, I assume you know what classes do. In the end, they serve as blueprints for us to create new objects. We do that with the new keyword. This creates a new object. In this case, we store it in gen, and I don't do anything with that object then, because name generator, which is the blueprint or the class for that object I'm creating, has a constructor which gets called when I call new. And then the code in here basically just gets a reference to my button by using the button tag as a selector. And then I attach an event listener for the click event. And then we'll need to fill this blank to tell JavaScript which code to execute when a click occurs. Then I also got a method in this class here. A method is just a function in a class, you could say. It's called add name, and in there I create a new instance of the name field class. So I create a new object. Again, I don't do anything with that object, but one thing I do is I create it. Here we got a constructor, and in that constructor I simply create a new list item. I then set some text to that list item. The text is the argument I'm getting here, essentially the name which I want to output. And the name is passed here. Right now it's always max. I'll also change this. And then I get a reference to my unordered list with that ID selector using that names ID here. And I add that name. Now, let's make this work by first of all removing these three question marks. And here I obviously want to call add name. I want to execute that add name method. Now for this, we already need to use the two things this video is about. This, and we also need to use or call a function in a special way, you could say. Because here I want to execute add name. And you could think we just specify add name like this. This would be wrong due to two reasons. First of all, if we specify it like this, JavaScript would look for a variable called add name or a function called add name in the scope of this constructor. And if it doesn't find it there, in the global scope, in the overall file, you could say, in the on the whole window to which this script is attached. Now, we got no add name variable or function in the constructor, and we also got none in the overall file or anywhere else in this app. So this will not work. And I can prove this to you. If we save that, and I open my developer tools here, and I reload this page, we already see add name is not defined because it doesn't find it. Because a method, what we have here, is attached to this object, so to this class and therefore to the object we create based on the class. If we want to tell JavaScript that I want to access a function that is attached to the class, so to say, we need that special this keyword. this essentially refers to the object the code is in. So here, this line of code is in this object, in the name generator. So if you want to refer to anything else that is attached to the name generator, like add name, we need to prepend this and then dot, because this essentially gives us access to this object, and then we can call methods or access properties on that object with the dot notation. So add name, now it calls this function on this object. This is how we can use this. We're still not there though. If I save this and I reload, I get max here without me touching that button. On the other hand, if I do click the button, nothing happens. And we also get no error, which makes that super hard to debug, of course. Now, the problem we got here is this function gets executed immediately. And why is that? Because I have parentheses here. What happens is JavaScript reads that code from top to bottom. And it does read and parse that code when the script gets first executed, which happens when the browser parses this HTML file and reaches the script import. It then immediately goes to the script file and parses that. This is important because this allows us to start our scripts when the page is loaded and load everything into memory and let the browser do its job. However, as it goes through that file, it also finds this line, and here what I do is I simply execute a function. This is how I execute a function, right? I use the function name, and the fact that it's a method here because it's attached to a class doesn't change that. I use the function or method name, I add parentheses, I could pass any arguments if that function would accept any, and we're done. This executes a function. The problem is here, I don't want to execute it immediately. What I want to do instead is I just want to tell JavaScript that it should register this event listener and eventually execute this function when that click occurs. So not immediately, only when that click occurs. And to do that, I remove these parentheses. So the two parentheses I had after add name. If I now save this and I reload, we don't see max right from the start. But if I click the button, now I'm adding my list items. Now why is that? Because right now what I'm doing is I'm just passing a reference to my function. So like an address, you could say, to that event listener. So I'm basically just telling JavaScript, hey, here is the address of the function or method you should execute when the click occurs, so that you know where to find it when you need to call it. Because we don't call that function on our own. JavaScript does that, so to say. The browser does that. It does that when the click occurs. That is exactly what we're setting up here. So we just pass the address to the function. With parentheses, like this, we would execute it immediately. We don't want to do that. Therefore, without parentheses, we just pass the reference, the address of the function, to the code, which should be aware of it and which should execute it when the time is due, so when we click. This is the important concept here, that we're just passing the reference, that we're just passing the address to the function. And this is perfectly valid and normal JavaScript code. This is no workaround or trick or hack or anything like that. This is the normal way of doing that. Now this is working. Now let's tweak that code a little bit, because this can actually behave strangely. Right now it doesn't, but it can. Let's say that in this class here, we want to manage a list of names and cycle through these names. So we could have something like names, and that is an array, let's say, and in there I got Max, I got my colleague Manu, and I got Anna. So I got these three names. And my idea is that for every click, I want to output a different name. Now, to do that, I need to get access to my names in add name, because that is ultimately where I pass the name to name field. Now, obviously, one easy workaround would be to simply move that constant down there. But let's pretend we need that in other places of this name generator class too. In that case, I want to manage it globally. Simply like that method is available from anywhere in this class too. With this, I want to make my names available from anywhere in this class. And therefore, I can create a property, a field named names. And I do this by adding this dot at the beginning. And what this does is, it's now not a constant or a variable anymore. Instead, you could say it's a variable attached to this class, a so-called property or field. So now this names can be used from anywhere inside this class, and by the way, also on the instantiated object. There we can call add name because it's part of that class, and we can access names because it's part of that class due to this keyword. So this really combines or attaches things to the entire class and therefore to the entire object which gets created. And what this allows me to do is I can now access this names down there. And now here in add name, I'm referring to my array of names which I'm setting up in the constructor. And this is how we initialize a property or field in the constructor and how we then use it somewhere else. However, I of course don't just want to use the entire array down there. I want to cycle through my names. So I'll add another property and I'll name it current name. The names of these properties are of course up to you. And I'll set this equal to a number, 0. Because index starts at index 0 and I want to start with name first. Because now what I can do is I can access the first element with this current name. So current name is null, is 0 initially. So I access the first element in my array here. Down there, first array element is max, and I pass that to name field. Now, of course, I want to change current name with every click. So after creating the name field, I can set current name to current name +1 with that ++ shortcut. We only got 3 elements in the array, so what I want to check here is if this current name is greater than this name's length, then I need to reset it, because then we exceeded the array. Now actually this is not the correct check, because the length of this array will be 3, and I actually already exceeded or exhausted the entire array if current name is 2, because the index starts at 0. If current name is 2, we'll have extracted the name Anna. So therefore, I actually want to convert this to greater than or equal to length. Length is 3, and if we incremented current name to 3, we know we don't have an element for that, so let's reset it. Now, let's see if that works. If I reload and I click add name, I get an error. And the error is that I cannot read the property undefined of undefined. And it occurs in line 19. Now, line 19 is this line where I try to use names and current name. And do you have any idea what's the issue here? Now, in theory, that code should work, but now we got a special thing of the this keyword. This does not always refer to the surrounding object, so to say, to the class. It's generally what it refers to, you could say, in most cases, but actually this is defined a bit differently in JavaScript. This refers to whoever called the function in which you use this. So in add name, we're using this. And now who did call, or what's responsible for executing this function? This is not this class. Indirectly it is, but not directly. Directly, the responsible thing is our button event here. And we can show this by console logging this. Let's look into this. Let's see what this is when we execute add name. If I click here, we see it's the button. So the button is this here. And that is the case because this event listener, and therefore the button, is executing our function when we click. We pass the address to the function to the button or to the event listener, and we say execute the function for us when a click occurs. And then this simply refers to the button. This is how it works in JavaScript. It's not always the object in which you write your code. It's the thing which calls your code, which executes your code, you could say. And that method gets executed by the button when a click occurs. Just to prove this, if I console log this in a constructor here, then we see there it's referring to the name generator object, to the class, to the constructor function. And that is the case because this code here is not executed by the button or anything like that. It's simply parsed by JavaScript from top to bottom, and therefore this then refers to the class, to the object that surrounds it. And this can be hard to understand. In the end, it is just something you can memorize. This refers to what's executing the code. And here the So here in the constructor, the what is executing the code is simply just, well, here, this line in the end, this is calling the constructor. And therefore, here, we call the code. And this in here refers to the constructor. Now for add name, the button calls add name, and this then refers to the button and not to this class anymore. On the other hand, if we would call add name here directly and not wait for a button click, so we execute it in the constructor here, and I reload, then you see it works, and this actually also refers to the name generator. The reason for this is that we again execute the code in the scope of this constructor. Therefore, the constructor and therefore the class is executing this line. So this refers to who executed it, and that is our constructor and therefore the class. This is how this works. Now, how can we change that behavior? One way of changing it is to use a special method we can call. And that is a method we can call on any function. It's the bind function. Bind actually allows us to tell JavaScript what this should be referring to in the function that will eventually get executed. So bind still does not immediately execute the function. We keep that behavior of just passing the address, but we configure the function for the time when it will get executed, so to say. And we do so with the first argument by telling it what should this refer to in the function when it gets executed in the future, no matter who executes it. And if I bind this here, I'm telling JavaScript that this inside this method should refer to the same thing this refers to in the constructor. And as we just saw with console log, in the constructor, this refers to the class and not to the button. So here I'm telling JavaScript, no matter who executes this add name, this inside of add name should always refer to this in the constructor, to whatever this is. And this in the constructor simply is our class because we're calling our constructor down there. This is one way of ensuring that this code down there will work. If I now save this and I reload, you see I can cycle through my names and output them there, and now this works as intended. And I know that this can be hard to wrap your head around. It's a special thing, and in the end, if you encounter any issues with you using this and suddenly it doesn't work, check if you're maybe calling your function indirectly through some event listener or anything like that, and therefore this in the function that gets executed might not be referring to your object anymore. Now, one other way of solving this, by the way, is that you pass an anonymous function here, and that anonymous function has to be an arrow function. Let's first of all use a normal anonymous function. So I define a function in place. This function here is not executed immediately. It's just defined, and it will still be executed by the click listener. And in there, I can, of course, call add name, this add name, like this. Now, this line, again, will not be executed immediately because this is executed immediately, but the code in this function is not. Instead, this code being executed immediately just registers the function in memory and passes it to the event listener. So if I save this, you see nothing gets rendered. So this add name is not executed immediately. But clicking on add name gives us another issue, that this add name is not a function. And the reason for this is that, again, this in here, in this anonymous function, will not refer to our class, but to the button. Because essentially, we just did the same we did before using bind. Now, when using an anonymous arrow function, which is also next generation JavaScript syntax introduced with ES6, then this changes. Now, if I save this and I reload, it works. And the reason for that is that arrow functions specifically solve that problem of this behaving differently. Because often you don't want it to behave differently, and therefore arrow functions were introduced to basically keep the context of this or the reference of this. So if you use an arrow function here, this will refer to the exact same thing it would refer to if it were used outside of that arrow function. This is the idea behind them. And therefore now this in here refers to the constructor. Now we call add name on this, so on our constructor, and therefore in the function, in add name, this refers to who called it. Who called it? Well, our constructor. So this inside here still refers to our constructor, to our class. A lot of mind yoga here, I guess, but really something which helps you a lot once you wrap your head around, and really something I also encourage you to just play around with. You got the code, you got the finished code too below the video, and I hope that this was helpful. See you in future videos, hopefully. Bye.